but the ability to take leadership lessons in a profoundly succinct and concise way and how to deliver your thoughts and execute upon them. There are few people that I have encountered like Mark and his colleagues from their training in the SEALs and in leadership. It taught me to think very differently. People say, can you give an example when I share this? And, a great one is learning how to be comfortable being uncomfortable. This is a classic SEAL doctrine, right? As classic as it comes. And of course, in their world, right, it's typically about, sitting in a freezing ocean for 8 hours, holding a telephone pole over their head like you see in the films. In our world, it's when you have to let someone go, when you're not going to renew a contract. That is not going to be a situation that's comfortable. It is going to be an uncomfortable situation. But learning how to get comfortable, not taking it lightly. These are major issues with people's lives at stake and careers and so forth in this extreme example. So I never say lighthearted or flippant or callous, right? But you have to be able to be comfortable with what you're about to do.
Hello and welcome to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. I'm your host, Lee Scheinbart, and along with a fabulous team at the CMO Group, we bring you the most crucial conversations in healthcare and physician leadership. The CMO Group is the only physician-run and physician-led organization focused on chief medical officers and exists to transform how physicians lead. The group helps CMOs and emerging physician leaders move from expert operators to enterprise leaders through a unique transformational process. Healthcare doesn't just need good doctors and leadership. It needs high-powered executives with deep medical knowledge. That transformation is the work of the CMO Group. Once more, we're breaking ground here on the podcast. For the first time today, we have a dean and CMO on the show. Today's guest is Dr. Chad Perlyn, the Executive Vice President and Chief Medical Officer and Dean of Nova Southeastern University's College of Allopathic Medicine and Executive Medical Director for NSU Health. Dr. Perlyn, born and raised in Miami, earned his undergraduate degree in English from Northwestern University. He later earned his MD degree from University of Miami and completed surgical training at Washington University School of Medicine, Barnes-Jewish Hospital, and ultimately becoming a pediatric plastic surgeon. Under a fellowship from the American College of Surgeons, he completed a doctorate in molecular biology at the University of Oxford and has also earned a master's degree in business administration and healthcare education from the University of Miami Herbert Business School. Dr. Perlyn served in numerous leadership roles with profound impact at Nicklaus Children's Hospital and Health System as a pediatric plastic surgeon before becoming the chief of the Division of Plastic Surgery and associate professor at FIU, Florida International University, Herbert Wertheim College of Medicine. In 2010, Dr. Perlyn had a pivotal moment in his life when he went to Haiti after that country suffered a devastating earthquake, and he became deeply engaged in global health efforts. In 2024, he arrived at Nova's Dr. Kiran C. Patel College of Allopathic Medicine as professor, dean, and CMO, and oversees the university's healthcare network, which includes 7 colleges dedicated to health professions education and research, as well as NSU Health, its integrated patient-centered network of clinics and care centers. Chad, welcome to the show.
Thank you. It is fantastic to be here. I love the title of the podcast. It is right on, and excited to talk to you and your guests.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, we're going to have a good time. You have a lot of great things to share to our listeners. But let's go back in the beginning a little bit. You described to me once upon a time you had aspirations of becoming a clinician scientist, surgeon scientist, and you pursued that PhD. But then a few years later, you found yourself in Haiti. Describe how that experience impacted you, changed your trajectory, and as you called it, that hard right turn toward leadership.
Yeah, absolutely. I love what Steve Jobs said. You can never connect the dots looking forward, only back. And it's fun to look back at our careers and see how we wound up where we do. So as you said, and as you said in my bio, I love surgery. I love academic medicine. I was a resident at WashU and realized I was becoming a pretty competent carpenter. I could make these incisions across the top of these babies' heads and peel the skin down and move the orbits and saw apart the bones. But didn't understand the why these babies were being born. And why is such an important question, I think, all of our lives, right? Why do things happen? Why do we make decisions? So I went back, as you said, and I still kind of shake my head how it all happened that I got a PhD from Oxford. But it was an amazing experience being there. Came back, finished my surgical training, expected, as you said, to be a surgeon scientist at FIU and Nicholas Children's in Miami, the Children's Hospital. And I was 9 months or so into my first year of practice when the earthquake in Haiti happened. And for those listeners outside of the South Florida area, this was a massive event. I mean, it was a massive worldwide event, but obviously struck home in South Florida, so close to Haiti. And I could see on the television what was happening. You could see the injured people and the really massive devastation to human life and limb. And sort of this famous moment in my family, my wife saw me watching and said, I still don't know if it was a question or a statement. You're going, aren't you? And I did go. I wound up helping lead one of the very first teams of pediatric surgeons to the island in the immediate aftermath. And that experience put me on a tremendous right turn. I did not know what leadership was. I did not know what it was like to be a leader. I had never been in that situation. And the funny thing was, I literally happened to be sitting. We had a chartered plane, a big plane that had been donated, and we packed the plane full of supplies and personnel. And I literally was one of the last guys on the plane. So I was sitting in seat 1A on this chartered plane, and the pilot came out and opened the door, and the airfield was dark when we were getting ready to land. It was very unsecure. The Air Force was just getting there and said, we're going to have a problem. Started to describe it and said, who's in charge? And we really hadn't gotten that far. And I just happened to be sitting in that first seat, literally 1A. And the pilot just said, well, I'm going to talk to you. And the next thing you know, I'm there on the loudspeaker, like the flight attendants use, telling the team how we're going to manage it. What I learned in that trip, and we can talk a lot more about it another time, but um, when you don't know what to do, just do the next right thing. I was so overwhelmed, and the situation was so overwhelming. There was no way we could figure out at that time all of the issues. But I knew we needed to get people off the plane. I knew we needed to get it secure. I knew we needed to unload the equipment hand over hand. And we just did the next right thing through that experience. Fast forward, I would come back from that trip and then help lead the rest of the efforts and coordinate, and was extremely involved, which then led to an incredibly unique opportunity. The director of surgical services, we don't have a surgeon in chief at Nicholas Children's, but it's about as close to that role as is, we call it the director of surgical services, was leaving to go up to New York to take on a major job himself at a major academic health system. He was a senior figure in pediatric surgery, and he really tapped me to become the next leader in the administration. And importantly, um, the colleagues, my fellow surgeons, many much more senior to me, um, embraced it. And so here I was, less than a year out of my training, being asked to assume, the most senior surgical leadership role. And I had great mentors. A guy named John Ragu was a great mentor and supporter in that mentorship. So important. But that experience, being thrust into that position that early in my career, just totally changed the trajectory. And I never wound up opening the lab. The scientist piece evolved into something very different. But I say I still love to search for the question why, except now it's not why the molecular biology happened. It's why is our organization making this decision? Why are we pursuing this path? Why are we partnering with these folks? So still asking the question, but in a different way than I ever thought I would.
Well, you just displayed, for those who study leadership, and I know you do, one of the key attributes, and that is a degree of curiosity, whether it's molecular biology curiosity or leadership decision making or contextual leadership. Why and what, and more questions than statements, more inquiry to seek as much as you can. That's a beautiful story. like you, there was a different crisis that was called Hurricane Katrina. And I did everything I could to get on a transport, a plane from our local Air Force base to get over there. Alas, I couldn't. Of course, I'm an oncologist. I don't know what the hell I was going to do there, but I did feel that need to be part of something. You had a much better skill set than I for the needs at the time. But this moving forward and curiosity are key elements of leadership. So I'm glad you took that hard right turn. It's clearly made an impact everywhere you go.
Thank you.
So there you are. You're gaining a lot of experience. You're put in a leadership role, and I think while at Nicholas Children's, senior executives approaches you about pursuing an MBA to further foster your development. Perhaps you could share how that
Yeah.
story unfolded and that next phase of your
Well,
leadership.
you got it. So this goes back again to this theme of mentorship, and it's a great expression. No surgeon stands at the table alone. We understand surgery well, and mentorship in our training. On the healthcare leadership side, you don't hear it talked as much, but I've been very fortunate to have some amazing mentors and people who have helped me develop as a healthcare executive. And one of them is Matthew Love, who's the CEO of Nicholas Children's. So Matt called me to his office one day, and you get called to the CEO's office, and obviously you're curious why you're being summoned. And he said, "Hey, I want to talk to you about something. Are you interested in doing an MBA?" And I thought about it for a second, and at the time, and I will admit publicly on the show, I was surfing a lot, and I just thought to myself, I kind of like my weekends, and right, and I just sort of said, "Yeah, thanks so much, but I'm not sure if I'm interested, and let me think about it." And I kind of was I hedged, right, and I was sort of non-committal. And he kind of shrugged his shoulders, and then it's just funny how our lives work. The next day, I saw the chairman of the board of the health system coming down the hall. He had been at a board meeting or such. And I run into in the hall, and he says to me in that moment, "Hey, Chad, congratulations on the MBA." And in that moment, I had this crystal clarity, clearer than any water I'd ever surfed in, crystal clear, that I wasn't really being asked if I wanted to do an MBA. I was really being asked, was I interested in being developed as a leader for the health system? And that just hit me. And I instantaneously understood what would happen if I said no. I did not understand or know what would happen if I said yes to the MBA. But I just realized, thankfully, my head snapped back on, that if I had said no, the doors would be closed. And that clearly there was a discussion about who were the upcoming leaders, who did the institution want to invest in, who did the CEO want to mentor, and so forth. So I said, "Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be doing it," and immediately went back and told Matt Love that I would be honored to do it. And of course, it was an extraordinary experience, and I did learn a tremendous amount. And ultimately, the path became clear when I was ultimately asked to be president of what's called NCPS, Nicholas Children's Pediatric Specialists, which is the wholly owned subsidiary of the health system that essentially uh, has all the docs and nurse practitioners and other folks in it. So I ultimately wound up running an organization with several hundred people, a major part of the health system, which I ran for several years and loved every minute of it.
We're going to talk a little bit about career intentionality in a little bit for some of our younger listeners. So I won't give away too much what we're going to talk about. But that is another element of leadership development, which is stretching outside of your comfort zone, and that's how you grow. So whether it's jumping over to Haiti or taking on a degreed level of education that you weren't really considering, both of those were clearly a stretch, and you have to do that to continue to grow. And leadership is never static; it's very dynamic, and one has to continue to evolve through that. Not every choice, not every growth, but you got to do more growing than staying stable. And that's biology, right?
Absolutely.
So again, next level in your journey, you identified a coach And it sounded to me when you shared that with me a rather special connection and a relationship, a very particular individual. Tell our listeners about how that happened and what that brought to you at that phase of your development.
Yeah, of course. And we don't talk enough about coaching in medicine. There's been a couple of high level pieces recently in some major news outlets about this. Uh, but coaching is critical. We all accept that Olympic athletes have their coach. Even basketball players who play on teams with the team coach often have their own individual coach. So coaching in medicine often has had a negative aspect to it, whether it's remediation or somebody's in trouble and needs a behavior coach or something like that. But I disagree entirely. I think coaching is key. And for me, when I had been asked, I pretty much had every job through the health system on the practitioner level, on the clinical side. And then one day I get this call that I was being asked to become the president of the organization. And for clarity, this was not like the president of the medical staff, an elected job. This was a CEO board appointed senior healthcare executive
Big boy job.
big boy job. Yeah. Big boy, big girl job. So my biggest concern in that moment was you're one of the guys or gals and you're operating one day in a trauma with the neurosurgeons and you're up to your elbows, both side by side in blood and doing your thing and feeling the vibe. And then all of a sudden, right, the next day I got to walk into the room and negotiate that person's contract and tell them what their compensation was going to be, tell them what their vacation was going to be, tell them, these life affecting things as an example. And that I knew that was a sticky point of a job where I was still practicing, still engaged, still having to be able to navigate the two worlds from the operating room to the boardroom. Um, and I knew I needed help. And who better to understand that than someone in the military, where something happens and the next guy gets the field promotion and suddenly you're in charge. So I looked for some coaches and wound up with a program that was run by a guy named Mark Devine. And Mark was a retired Navy SEAL, a commander in the SEALs. And I will tell you, I learned more from Mark and his team than I hate to say it. A lot of the diplomas on the back of the wall there's some pretty great places, and I've been blessed with some pretty good mentors. But the ability to take leadership lessons in a profoundly succinct and concise way, and how to deliver your thoughts and execute upon them. There are few people that I have encountered like Mark and his colleagues from their training in the SEALs and in leadership. And that was just an extraordinary experience. It taught me to think very differently. People say, "Can you give an example when I share this?" And a great one is learning how to be comfortable being uncomfortable. This is a classic SEAL doctrine, right? As classic as it comes. And of course, in their world, right, it's typically about, sitting in a freezing ocean for 8 hours, holding a telephone pole over their head, like you see in the films. In our world, it's when you have to let someone go, when you're not going to renew a contract. That is not going to be a um, situation that's comfortable. It is going to be an uncomfortable situation. But learning how to get comfortable, not taking it lightly. These are major issues with people's lives at stake and careers and so forth. In this extreme example, so I never say lighthearted or flippant or callous, right? But you have to be able to be comfortable with what you're about to do. And ultimately, and part of this came out of discussions with one of Mark's guys, I get comfortable with what I call the three H's. If in everything you're doing, you know you are being number one, honest, number two, helpful. And that helpful could be to the organization. It may not be to the person, but to your higher cause, right? Honest, helpful, and humble. If you are doing those three things, you can be comfortable with what you have to do and achieve. So that's just one example, but Mark and his group's wisdom helped me focus so much, especially in those early days as I was getting comfortable managing and leading my peers. And in fact, the first thing we talked about on the very first day, I still remember, and he was the one who introduced it to me, was this notion of servant leadership, that you are ultimately there to serve. I think the other important lesson that I learned was around the dichotomy of leadership. And this is something that I think is fascinating. You think about, especially when you manage and lead your peers, one of our jobs is to take care of our people, right? We want our docs to thrive. That was one of my key words. I want our docs to thrive. We want them to be successful. We want them to be happy. We want them to be financially stable, if not growing, um, and all such things. Same thing in the military, right? The leadership of the SEAL teams needs to look after the SEAL teams and make sure that they're well and intact and thriving. On the same token, the mission, right? Obviously, much more dramatic than the teams. Um, you put those guys in harm's way. And there were times when, for the mission of the organization and the broader mission of healthcare for the community, we had to make difficult decisions where those two lines intersect. So that dichotomy of leadership, again, back to my other quote, just getting comfortable thinking and understanding like that helped me so much as a young leader.
So I'm going to attempt to summarize what was just a master class. We'll call that not 101 leadership, that's 201 leadership, and a couple of notions. And I spend a lot of time with folks who have served in the military. One of my mentors does a great deal of work in translating what is learned in the military and is taught relative to leadership in healthcare. So I'm right there with you with everything you just said. As physicians, we are trained, thankfully, in some of the empathy and to a degree, the humility and honesty. Now, some of us are more humble than others, and some of us still need to work on that, myself included. But taking those physician skills into a very uncomfortable situation, first of all, you've already been trained in it. So remember, you know how to do this because you've done this with families and young patients. And I did that with my patients. So don't give up on those physician skills, but discerning the uncomfortableness, the ambiguity, the uncertainty. And hell, in all the things that I've done, I don't know if I was ever comfortable with it, but I became aware of it and that I need to sit with it and work within that realm. And over time, become more used to the experience. And maybe that's the comfort that we're talking about. And we are trained not to be that way. You, you've got that child, you're operating. I mean, you have to make judgment calls if something anatomically shows up that's a little bit unusual, but you're trained to deal with that with a degree of certainty to affect the outcome. I think there's a lot of parallels here, and we certainly could do a whole show on that. But the value of a coach, you and I are in total agreement, and we promote all of our listeners who are aspiring into these roles to take that very seriously. Um, Now we're going to flip a little bit and move towards some of that intentionality and helping people drive towards this. So your roles, my role, we're of a generation where you get tapped on the shoulder. You're a nice guy. You're a smart doctor. Would you consider this? And we don't always see ourselves that way. And of course, other people aren't willing to do it. So we take, we take on some of these roles. But I think you and I are both experiencing folks coming up to us saying, hey, I would like to go into leadership. How do I begin this journey? How do I get a leadership job? You shared with me this framing around like these three categories of how you start to embrace physician leadership, these three roles. Can you share your thinking on that?
Sure. So I'll just start by saying I feel so blessed is really the right word to have the role that I have, and it's so unique. And you mentioned it a little bit. I serve as executive vice president of the university and chief medical officer of the university. So I oversee all healthcare and all the healthcare programs, and then dean of NSU MD of the allopathic. Nova has both an MD and a DO school, one of three schools in the country that has both. So I get to be involved in all of it and be the dean of one. And I never in my career imagined that I would be a dean or be operating at this level of leadership. And people ask me all the time if I had some secret sauce. They say, how do I get into leadership? How do I develop a career? And so I've thought about it. And when I speak to people early on, I like to tell them that I think there are three types of leadership jobs in healthcare. And if you can identify the bucket, it gives some direction because each of them is very different. You can move back and forth between them, but they're very different. So the first bucket or pillar, if you will, I would say are the clinical leadership roles. And these are your service line director, program director, then perhaps it becomes chief of a division, and then ultimately chair of a department. And the chair lines can blur a bit in the really big chairs, but for the most part, these are essentially clinical jobs, and they're designed to run the departments, provide the best care, support the staff, take care of the people, run the operations, set the strategies, but they're really around the clinical aspect of care. Then, on the other end of the spectrum, you have the healthcare executives. And these are, with the exception of the CMO, which we'll come back to, these are the C-suite jobs in physician leadership. It could be president of the organization. It could be chief physician executive. Sometimes it's chief experience officer. But these are administrative jobs. They're often finance heavy, even in my role. And then you have this CMO and maybe chief quality officer type job in the middle. And these I call the hybrid jobs, where you're really interfacing. The great CMOs in the major systems understand how to have one leg on each side of what I just described, how to be able to navigate fluidly with the physicians in the departments on the clinical issues, because as your podcast name says, right, a lot of this is about putting out fires and solving problems, but be able to just effectively help guide the organization and be able to walk into the boardroom with the more traditional executives. You and I were laughing this morning whether I'd wear a white coat or a suit, right? The executive guys wearing the suit, the CMOs, man, they're still in white coats. Um, how to be able to navigate between those two and help set strategy and help make financial decisions and help understand spend when a surgeon's wants to use one implant and the other is so much more cost effective, and how to bring that surgeon to that discussion. The first thing I say to people when they inquire about, they say, "Oh, I'd love to be a leader in healthcare. How do I do something more than just being a doc?" I say, "Well, let's think about these three buckets. And what are you interested in? Because if you're interested in being chair of the Department of Surgery at a major academic system, yeah, there's absolutely some overall on the executive side or CMO side, but it's very different um, than if you wanted to be a chief quality officer or if you wanted to be a physician executive. Same thing. If you want to be a CMO, it's a different skill set that you need to develop than being a clinical leader. So there's obviously overlap, but there's also these very clear roles, and understanding everything helps people get an entryway into what they're interested in, or at least a framework to think about what they may be interested in.
Yeah, it's a brilliant framework, and that's why I asked that you share it with the listeners. It struck me, it struck a chord in me. I served in medical director role, service line, chair, chief, chair, all of that, and you get to the CMO role. And then the next question is when someone says, "Well, what do you want to really be when you grow up?" And actually, that's a very interesting question. And I came to realize that becoming a chief physician executive was a wildly different role than being a chief medical officer. And I gave that a ton of thought. And I do, and to your point, I think when people ask these questions, we need to give them these thought provoking, what is it that you're looking for? Where can you reasonably start and where might you reasonably end? So I love this, and you're going to hear me repeat this, and I'll give you credit every time we talk about it.
Oh, good. No credit needed.
Well, so, all right, look, so you're there, you're at Nova, and I really have a curiosity myself about what you and your faculty, and I happen to know one of your work colleagues, Dr. Stuart Marcus. I know you guys are intentional about leadership education and development. So maybe at a high level, broad level, what is going on at Nova relative to education at the student level
Sure.
around leadership?
Well, we are very fortunate, and I'll just share with the listeners so they have a sense of scale and scope. NSU, Nova Southeastern University, is now the largest educator of healthcare professionals in the country. I'll say that again. NSU is now the largest educator of healthcare professionals in the country, largest educator of physicians in Florida, MD school, DO school, dental school, nursing, psychology, optometry, psych, um, pharmacy. If I didn't say it, I'm sure I'm missing someone, and I'll hear about it. But and then all of the other programs, AA, PA, CRNA soon, rehab, etc. So massive entity, which gives us amazing access to a tremendous number of bright young minds. And I always make the point that I'm very proud of the number of students that we educate, which is great, but numbers are not important. What is important is that we are sending out the highest quality physician and healthcare leaders that we can possibly train, and I'm proud of that. Part of that is how we think about um, leadership and what what perhaps you could call the softer skills in medicine, and the development of these skills is so important, and we are making a very cognizant effort to do that through our curriculum, through our examples, and how we are getting our students to think about their role and interacting with people. And a great example of that is last year at the white coat ceremony. Everybody on this call knows what white coat is, first day of medical school. I decided to give a book. And I know we'll talk a little bit more about books because you can't see the stack from the where we are in the call, but I have a huge stack of books back there. Um, so I decided to give a book. And in my speech, I shared a book that was called Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara. And here I am talking, and I make this point. Why is the dean of the medical school giving you on, essentially your first day of medical school and telling you the most important thing you're going to read in all of medical school? There you have it. Look at that. Unbelievable. That was not planned for the listeners.
Not planned, but a dear
A
friend
book,
of mine
you
had
just
another.
lifted a book right off his desk.
Yeah.
Well done. There you go. So, so I said, why, why is the dean giving you this book about food and wine? For those on listening who haven't read it, it's essentially about food and wine and how they took the restaurant 11 Madison Park to be the number one restaurant in the world. The reality is, it has nothing to do with food and wine. That's just the context to talk about how to lead an organization, how to motivate staff, how to get people to feel valued, how to get people to feel heard and seen and feel special and engaged, and how to develop a culture of excellence. And the book does it so beautifully that that I decided like this is what I was going to give to the docs. And the truth is, unreasonable hospitality. And in the speech, we talk about what's the key word in hospitality, hospital, and what has been lost in so much of medicine today is that aspect. So that's just one example of how we think here. Um, and then we have lots of other ways. The Leadership Book Club is a great example. And
Tell us about the book club. I want to hear about the book club.
yeah, so the book club is great, and it's actually one of my favorite things. Being dean is an amazing job because it's a job of influence. You get this such a unique opportunity to influence these young students who who still have just such a keenness to learn and absorb knowledge. And so the faculty often ask me, did I want to teach? And, I could go teach anatomy in the lab or physiology or something, but nowhere near as good as the regular faculty who do far exceed me in their knowledge and teaching. But I said, what can I do to actually teach leadership? How can I teach a skill set that I've been privileged to? I'm certainly no pro at it, but I've had enough experience now that maybe I have a few lessons to pass on. And so we started the book club, and the students love it, and it's packed. We have 65 students a year in the class, and about 20 at any given time are in the book club. So about a third of our students are in per year are engaged. So I'm thrilled with that level of engagement. And we pick a book and go through it, and a lot of them are the classic books. I pulled a couple. Simon Sinek is obviously a huge fan. This is Leaders Eat Last, but we just read Start with Why. You heard me asking about why being this most important question. So that's a classic. We read Stephen Covey's The Speed of Trust. And this one this was a pivot. I swapped this out after something. There was something in the media had come up, and we talk a lot about this a lot in medical school today. The public's loss of trust in science, which we've seen in healthcare to some extent, in the scientific method and who's an expert, who's an authority, these type things. So the speed of trust was a response to something happening, because I wanted the students to understand how long it takes as a leader to build trust and how quickly you can lose it in an instant. So that was a powerful book and obviously stimulated a lot of discussion. Um,
What's the latest book that you guys have discussed? The most
um,
recent?
I think what's on the next list is Team of Teams. I think we're about to do this. Team of Teams by Stan McChrystal. This is great. This is a military book. Sometimes they come from different genres, but that's what we are as a medical school. That's what we were as a hospital, right? For all the CMOs, you're a team of teams. The cardiac unit, the orthopods, the internist, the dermatologist. You're a team of teams. And then I think after that we'll do one of my favorite leaders of all time is Shackleton. I'm a huge Ernest Shackleton fan, and the classic story of not only how he saved all the men and kept them all alive and rescued in this incredible thing, but he would take off his boots and give them to the person in need. So you want to talk about servant leadership? There was no servant leader like Ernest Shackleton.
Yeah,
So it was fun.
you just described like 3/4 of the curriculum in the CMO Academy. So excellent plug for the CMO Academy. Well done.
There you go.
And that was unplanned because we didn't talk about these things.
Nope. That's great. That's great.
Yeah. So what do you learn from the students and this trust issue? So ponder that question for a second, because perhaps the greatest work of this generation of students, whether they're sort of traditional right out of school or had a few years of experience under their belt, this generation will have to explore and manage the broken trust in society. So you and I were granted it, even if we hadn't yet earned it, because medicine was still considered the hierarchy of knowledge that you and I had, the skill that you had, the skill that I had. I mean, but there's a leveling going on and a distrust going on. And so this next generation is going to have to foster a way of managing that in a way that you and I don't think had when we were at that part of our career. So ponder that, but also I want to know what you're hearing from what are you learning from these young people?
Yeah. So I'll answer that part first. They are operating in a world of tremendous distrust, of a lack of communication. Face-to-face communication is often hard, or is not the way people communicate. It's obviously hard to get a real sense of someone through emoji communication, right? We often communicate through emojis. Um, the Egyptian had their hieroglyphics, and that's what we've gone back to, right? I could send you, a thumbs up arm guy and a doctor to tell you what a great time I had on the podcast, and you would know exactly what I was talking about. So, and the vulnerability. Actually, we just read another one was Brene Brown's book about being vulnerable as a leader, and they feel it, and they are concerned about the environment they will operate in and the relationships, and they spend so much time learning and studying and becoming an authority and having that question. And I think those are all real. So part of what we have to do as mentors is teach them the tools of how to overcome that, and share with them situations that we've been in so that they can navigate effectively. And one of the examples or lessons that I use when we talk about this, and we were talking about it like in Speed of Trust, was early on in the COVID pandemic, there was tremendous support for physicians. I mean, you remember the parades and the fire trucks going through the streets, science people lined up. But as the pandemic went on and on, that changed, and we saw the mistrust coming, particularly around the vaccines. And we were out with the Children's Hospital, absolutely supporting the vaccines, and talking about why they were important for kids and why they're important for schools, et cetera. And I remember I got publicly eviscerated one night. That's the word I would use, eviscerated. And kudos to the person who did it, right? I give them respect for the technique, which was I was moderating the panel, and we had a panel of docs. And this person got up to ask a question, and politely but powerfully gutted me for what the heck did I know about vaccines? And who the heck was I to be talking about vaccines? I was a pediatric plastic surgeon. Like, shame on me. And I actually thought for a second, you know what? He's got a point, right? He's got a point. So, what did I do from that? The next time I was out moderating the panel, I addressed that to the audience. And I said, many of you may be wondering why I'm here speaking to you about vaccines as a pediatric surgeon. But I'm not speaking to you as a pediatric surgeon today. I'm speaking to you as the president and leader of one of the country's largest healthcare pediatric organizations, the largest children's hospital in the state of Florida. And I'm going to be helping moderate the panel with experts who did train in immunology and infectious disease and critical care medicine. So that little switch, learning to do that, became so powerful. Now, of course, it's not a complete shield, but it helped put context and restore trust in people, or at least take away the ability to attack the trust. So sharing those kinds of stories and helping our students just helps prepare them for situations that they're going to be in the future.
So I think we're at Master Leadership Class 302, and here's why I say that. So a lesson in this at this level is I would submit that the young students today that are entering the career of medicine have things on their plate that we didn't have. And if one of the rules of leadership is to listen to people, then we need to listen to our young people and understand the universe they're in and the universe they're going to inherit. And in a way, through no fault of theirs or ours or social media or the internet, we're just simply going to have to meet them where they're at. If we approach the students with, that's not the way it is, that's not what Flexner said 100 years ago, this is how you learn, I think we're going to fail them. And I think we need to recognize that their world is their world and our world was ours. And we share it today, but we've got to recognize what's on their plate and help them navigate these truly uncharted territories that they're entering. As it relates to being a subject matter expert as a physician, as a leader, one of the key qualities in our teaching is that we don't ask our CMO, our aspiring CMOs, to be subject matter experts in everything. It's impossible. It's a time waster. It will destroy you. But you do need to surround yourself with those experts and gather that input. And then you have the executive responsibility for making the decision based on how well you investigated. Back to the investigating curiosity, why?
You got it.
And at some point, if somebody doesn't do it in a harmful way, in a manner that's semi-respectful, every feedback you get, there's only two words. And this we learned from a coach on our show a while ago. Thank you. Thank you for your feedback. And you look in the mirror and you go, maybe that person has a legitimate point. Now, if they did it in a harmful way, an unprofessional way, you have every right to, you give back what in the manner in which it was received, right?
Sure.
That philosophy. But if it was given legitimately, even if they were angry, but not trying to be hurtful, you have to look in the mirror. And I think that's we're at 303. So any reflections on that?
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly right. I think one of the key skills is listening for sure, and being able to pivot and be self-reflective, and I think it's so important because we're often in situations where we may not be the expert or may not know the answer, and if you try to pretend your way past it, imposter syndrome is very real. That's a totally different thing, and we all feel it early on in our careers, and when we feel like the job is too big for our britches, and we're not sure of ourselves. But if you try, there's a difference between that and pretending to be an expert in something you are not. And in today's world, that will be seen right through by your colleagues, the public, the students. I don't know everything. Deans become deans. Either they were assistant deans and went up that way, they were chairs of departments and went up that way, or they were healthcare executives. So no matter how from one of those three ways you became dean, you're not going to know much about the other two. The folks who became deans, who were who were academics, don't quite understand all the pieces of running a healthcare system and don't understand the clinical parts. The chairs right, know very well how to run the clinical departments, but they may not understand the academic side, the accreditation piece, the curriculum development. So however you get to the role, there's going to be two of the three main parts that you're probably not familiar with. And that's fun, right? As long as you're surrounded by a great team of people who trust you and you trust them. And ultimately, my job is to support the team and to say I don't know when I don't know, and to lean in when there's something I can be useful. But that makes for just an awesome opportunity to contribute and grow at the same time.
Well, I want to thank you for the opportunity for you to contribute to our listeners as they grow into these roles and seek any framing of what you just described, because honestly, we need more leaders in healthcare. I don't care where you come from, we need you. So step up, step in, and we'll be
Agree.
glad to have you. So, do you have any other last thoughts that you might want a CMO to have gotten out of this conversation before we wrap it up?
Um, I think the best thing, as we talked about before, is understanding how to navigate those two pillars, how to be able to flow into the clinical side and work and support the docs there, but then understand how also to flow across to the executive side, where um, there may be a different mindset. And on one hand, the docs may be saying we need X, Y, and Z, and then you go to the C-suite and they be telling you you have to cut Y and Z because resources are tight. And you are the person who is often that agent. And in many ways, it becomes the most influential role for the whole healthcare system because of one thing: trust. And you need the doc's trust and you need the executive's trust so you can function ultimately as the highest level of diplomat, right? You are the ambassador, if you will, to the health system often. And that diplomacy is all based on trust. So the more you can stay helpful, humble, and honest, as we said before, I think the greater that trust will exist for you.
I love it. And again, if you're a physician, you know these things and you've delivered horrible news to the worst moments in people's lives. You know how to do it. You just got to learn how to get comfortable with the uncomfortable for sure.
Yep.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show,
Thank
Chad.
you.
Thank you for sharing that energy, the passion. Ladies and gentlemen, you have been listening to the Fire Chief Podcast, the only podcast dedicated to the Chief Medical Officer. If you want to learn more about how to infuse leadership development into your medical school, then reach out to the fine folks at Nova Southeastern University's College of Allopathic Medicine and all of their health professions. And if you want to learn more about your own physician leadership development and about how to transform yourself and become a CMO, then contact me. I'll set you up with the CMO group and everything you need to know about leading in healthcare. I love talking with CMOs and deans from all over the world. So get out there, develop your educational strategy, your intentionality, your own book club, and set your people up for success. But remember, whatever you do, look out for yourself and be good to others out there. Thank you for listening.
Thanks so much for having me.